The desert didn't care. It never had. The wind swept across the cracked plains like a restless spirit, dragging dust over bones, over forgotten tracks, over stories nobody lived long enough to tell. Out here, mercy wasn't something you expected. It was something you prayed for, and usually didn't get. Every morning, just before the sun clawed its way over the horizon, the men gathered. They came laughing. Boots crunching over gravel, spurs jingling like they were heading to a show. And in a way, they were. Because what waited for them behind the old, rotting barn wasn't work. It was entertainment. She hung there. Upside down. Her ankles tied tight to a thick wooden beam, rope biting into skin that had long since turned raw. Her hair brushed the dirt, tangled and heavy with dust. Her arms hung limp, fingers barely twitching anymore. And her face. Her face had forgotten what it meant to feel like her own. They called her, the lesson. No one used her real name anymore. At first, she had screamed. The first day, the second day, maybe even the third. Her voice had torn itself apart against the empty sky, begging anyone, to hear her. But nobody came. Nobody ever came. So eventually, she stopped. Now she just breathed. Slow. Weak. Barely there. The men would circle her, making jokes, placing bets on how long she'd last. Some threw water on her face to wake her. Others poked at her ribs, laughing when she flinched. She's still alive, one would say. Barely, another would answer. Good. Makes it more fun. And then they'd leave her there. Hours. Every single day. The blood rushing to her head, the world spinning until reality blurred into something distant, something she no longer fully belonged to. She had been someone once. A daughter. A dreamer. A girl who believed the world had a place for her. But that girl had died the day she was dragged into this place. The day the dust swallowed her name. Miles away, a lone rider cut through the horizon. The cowboy didn't look like much at first glance. Hat pulled low. Coat worn from years of sun and storms. A rifle slung across his back like it had always belonged there. He rode slow. Not because he had nowhere to go. But because he had learned long ago, the faster you rode in this land, the quicker you found trouble. And trouble always came. The horse beneath him snorted, uneasy. That's when he noticed it. A sound. Faint. Barely carried by the wind. Not a scream. Not anymore. But something worse. A silence that shouldn't exist. The cowboy pulled the reins gently, stopping at the crest of a low ridge. His eyes narrowed as he looked toward the broken structure in the distance, the barn. Places like that didn't just appear. They grew from something rotten. And he had spent enough years walking this earth to recognize the smell. He adjusted his hat. Then nudged his horse forward. Back at the barn, the men were finishing their morning ritual. Leave her, one of them said. Wiping his hands. Son'll do the rest. Another chuckled. Or not. She's stubborn. Won't matter. They walked off, their laughter fading into the open land. And she hung there. Alone again. The world swayed around her, vision dimming at the edges. Her breathing slowed even further, like her body was beginning to forget the effort. Maybe this would be the day. Maybe this would finally end. A strange kind of peace started to creep in. Then. Footsteps. Different. Not loud. Not careless. Measured. She didn't react at first. Couldn't. But then a shadow fell across her face. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the world stopped spinning. The cowboy stood there, staring at her. He didn't speak right away. Didn't move. Just looked. And what he saw, hardened something inside him. Not shock. Not pity. Something colder. Something sharper. Justice. Slowly, he stepped forward. His hand reached for the rope. She tried to focus, her vision swimming. A stranger. Another man. Another face. But something was different. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't looking at her like she was nothing. He looked at her like she mattered. And that alone was enough to bring a tear she didn't know she still had left. The knife flashed. The rope snapped. And the world came crashing down. She didn't feel the ground. Didn't feel the impact. But she felt something else. Arms. Strong. Steady. Catching her before the earth could. The cowboy lowered her gently, laying her on the dirt like she was something fragile, something worth protecting. "Easy," he said quietly. His voice wasn't loud. But it carried weight. Real weight. Not the kind built from fear. The kind built from truth. Her lips trembled. No sound came out. But her eyes said everything. "Why? Why would you help me?" The cowboy didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he pulled a canteen from his side and lifted her head just enough to let a few drops touch her lips. "Drink," he said. She did. Barely. But it was enough. Enough to remind her she was still alive. Enough to remind her. Maybe she didn't want to die after all. The wind shifted. And in the distance, voices returned. The men were coming back. The cowboy stood slowly, eyes scanning the horizon. His jaw tightened. Then he reached for his rifle. Not rushed. Not panicked. Just ready. Because some things in this world didn't deserve a second chance. And for the first time in a long time, he had found something worth fighting for. If you're already feeling the weight of this story, hit that subscribe button, because what comes next isn't just survival. It's reckoning. The men didn't expect resistance. Why would they? Out here, they were the law. Or at least, they believed they were. As they approached the barn, their laughter faded. Something felt off. Too quiet. Too still. One of them slowed. "You hear that?" Another shook his head. "Hear what?" "Exactly." They reached the clearing. And froze. The rope hung loose. Empty. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then. "Where is she?" The question barely left his mouth before the sound answered. A gunshot. Sharp. Precise. One of the men dropped instantly, hitting the dirt before he even understood what had happened. Panic exploded. Ambush. Find him. But the cowboy was already moving. Not wild. Not reckless. Calculated. Every step placed with purpose. Every shot, final. Another man fell. Then another. The rest scrambled for cover, firing blindly toward the rocks and broken fences. "You think you can take us?" one of them shouted. The cowboy didn't respond. He didn't need to. Because this wasn't about proving anything. This was about ending something. Behind the barn, she lay hidden. Weak. Barely conscious. But alive. And for the first time. Safe. The sounds of gunfire echoed through her like distant thunder. Each shot a reminder that something was happening, something she couldn't yet see. But she felt it. The shift. The change. The end of something terrible. Back in the clearing, the last of the men stumbled backward, hands shaking. "Wait, wait. We can talk." The cowboy stepped into view. Calm. Unshaken. "No," he said simply. The man swallowed hard. You don't understand. I understand enough. The wind picked up, dust swirling between them. You made a choice, the cowboy continued. Now you live with it. The man's voice cracked. Please. The shot rang out. And then. Silence. It was over. Just like that. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just, finished. The cowboy lowered his weapon, scanning the area one last time before turning back toward the barn. Toward her. She was awake when he returned. Barely. But enough. Her eyes found him instantly. Still trying to understand. Still trying to believe. You came back, she whispered, her voice like broken glass. The cowboy knelt beside her. I said I would. You didn't say anything, she managed weakly. A faint, almost invisible smile touched his lips. Didn't need to. He offered her his hand. Slowly. Carefully. Like he wasn't sure she'd take it. But she did. Her fingers trembling as they wrapped around his. And in that moment. Something shifted. Not just in the world around them. But inside her. Because for the first time since the darkness began. She wasn't alone. Days later, the town would hear the story. They'd whisper about the cowboy who walked into hell and walked out with someone the world had already forgotten. They'd argue about who he was. Where he came from. Why he did it. But they'd never get a clear answer. Because some men don't do what they do for recognition. They do it because it needs to be done. And as for her. She would heal. Slowly. Painfully. But surely. The scars would remain. But they wouldn't define her. Not anymore. Because she had been seen. Saved. Remembered. And somewhere out on the endless horizon. The cowboy kept riding. Hat low. Eyes forward. Looking for the next place the world had gone wrong. Because as long as men like him existed. Darkness would never have the final word. If this story moved you, if you felt every moment of her struggle and his silent strength, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Because out here in the Wild West, every story matters. And the next one might just stay with you forever.